The humid August air of Orlando hung heavy that morning, carrying with it the distant sounds of theme park excitement and the everyday bustle of a city that never truly sleeps. But inside our small house on Maple Street, an unsettling silence had settled over everything like a thick blanket. It was the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl, the kind that tells you something fundamental has shifted in your world without warning. I had been living with my grandfather James for 3 years now, ever since my parents decided their careers were more important than raising their daughter. At 22, I thought I had life figured out, but Grandpa James had a way of showing me just how much I still had to learn. He was 83 years old, with hands weathered by decades of honest work and eyes that held stories I was only beginning to discover. That morning started like any other. I expected to find him in his usual spot at the kitchen table, reading the Orlando Sentinel with his coffee growing cold beside him. Instead, I found an empty chair and a note that would change everything I thought I knew about the man who had become my anchor in this chaotic world. The house felt different without his presence. The morning light streaming through the kitchen windows seemed harsher somehow, illuminating dust particles that danced in the air like tiny ghosts. His coffee mug sat unwashed in the sink, a small rebellion against his usual meticulous habits that made my stomach clench with worry. 3 weeks earlier, Grandpa James had said something that made my blood run cold. We were sitting on the front porch, watching the neighborhood kids chase fireflies in the fading daylight, when he turned to me with an expression I had never seen before. "Avery," he said, his voice carrying a weight that seemed to press down on my chest, "I want you to know that I won't be here come September." I laughed it off at first, thinking he was making one of his dark jokes. Grandpa James had always had a peculiar sense of humor, the kind that made you uncomfortable before you realized he was just trying to get a rise out of you. But when I looked into his eyes that evening, I saw something that made my stomach drop. He wasn't joking. "What do you mean you won't be here?" I asked, setting down my glass of sweet tea with trembling hands. He stared out at the street for a long moment, watching Mrs. Rodriguez from next door water her garden. The sprinkler caught the last rays of sunlight, creating tiny rainbows in the mist. It was beautiful and ordinary, and somehow that made his words even more terrifying. "I mean exactly what I said, sweetheart. Come September, I'll be gone." The way he said it wasn't dramatic or emotional. It was matter of fact, like he was telling me it might rain tomorrow or that the grocery store was having a sale on milk. That casual certainty was what scared me most. "Grandpa, you're scaring me. Are you sick? Have you been to the doctor?" He turned to look at me then, and I saw something in his expression that I couldn't quite identify. It wasn't sadness exactly, but it wasn't peace either. It was something deeper, more complex. "I'm not sick, Avery. At least, not in the way you're thinking. But there are some things a man knows about himself, things that don't require a doctor's confirmation." I spent the next hour trying to get him to explain what he meant, but he had retreated into that stubborn silence that I knew so well. It was the same silence he used when I asked about my grandmother, or about why he had never remarried, or about the locked room upstairs that he said was just storage, but somehow felt like so much more. That night, I lay awake listening to him move around the house. Usually, he was asleep by 9:30, but I could hear his footsteps creaking across the old wooden floors until well past midnight. It sounded like he was pacing, or maybe looking for something. When I finally drifted off to sleep, my dreams were filled with empty chairs and unanswered questions. The next morning, he acted like nothing had happened. He made his usual breakfast of scrambled eggs and toast, asked me about my plans for the day, and settled into his routine as if he hadn't just told me he was going to disappear from my life. But I noticed things I had never paid attention to before. The way he lingered over his coffee, as if he was trying to memorize the taste. The way he touched the photographs on the mantelpiece when he thought I wasn't looking. The way he stared out the window with an expression that seemed to be saying goodbye to something I couldn't see. Over the following days, I became hyper-aware of his every movement, every gesture, every word. I started paying attention to the small rituals that made up his daily life. The way he folded his newspaper into precise quarters before reading it. The way he hummed old jazz standards while washing dishes. The way he always checked the locks on the doors twice before going to bed. I also began to notice changes that had been so gradual I hadn't registered them before. He had been eating less, pushing food around his plate rather than finishing his meals. He had stopped watching his favorite evening news program, claiming it was too depressing. Most telling of all, he had begun giving things away. Small things at first. He gave Mrs. Rodriguez his collection of gardening magazines, claiming he had read them all and didn't need them anymore. He donated several boxes of books to the local library, saying he was tired of dusting them. When I confronted him about these changes, he brushed off my concerns with practiced ease. "I'm just decluttering, sweetheart. At my age, you realize you don't need so many possessions weighing you down." But I could see through his casual explanations. There was an intentionality to his actions that spoke of preparation, of someone getting his affairs in order. The realization filled me with a dread that settled in my chest like a stone. The note was written in his careful handwriting on a piece of paper torn from the notepad we kept by the telephone. It was brief, almost clinical in its simplicity. "Avery, I told you I wouldn't be here in September. Don't look for me. Take care of yourself. The house is yours now. Love, Grandpa James." My hands shook as I read it for the third time, hoping the words would somehow rearrange themselves into something that made sense. The coffee pot was still warm, which meant he hadn't been gone long. His bed was made with military precision, just like always. His reading glasses were folded neatly on his nightstand, next to the book he had been reading about the history of Central Florida. I called his name throughout the house, checking every room, even though I knew he wouldn't answer. The silence that greeted me was different from the comfortable quiet I had grown accustomed to. This silence felt hollow, like the house itself was holding its breath. I called the police first, but they weren't much help. Officer Martinez, a kind woman with tired eyes, explained that adults had the right to leave if they wanted to. Since there were no signs of struggle and he had left a note, it wasn't considered a missing person case unless he had been gone for 48 hours. "But you don't understand," I told her, pacing around the living room while she took notes. "He's 83 years old. He doesn't drive anymore. He barely leaves the neighborhood except for doctor's appointments. Has he been showing any signs of confusion or memory problems?" she asked gently. "No, nothing like that. He's sharp as ever. That's what makes this so strange." Officer Martinez left me her card and promised to file a report, but I could see in her expression that she thought this was just an elderly man who had decided to move to a retirement community or go live with other family members. She didn't understand that Grandpa James was all the family I had left. After she left, I started my own investigation. I went through his room methodically, looking for any clue about where he might have gone. His clothes were all there, including his favorite sweater and the comfortable shoes he wore for his daily walks around the neighborhood. His medications were still in the bathroom cabinet. His wallet was gone, but that was the only thing missing. I found something strange in his desk drawer, a bus schedule for routes that went from Orlando to various cities across Florida. Several destinations were circled in pencil, but the marks were so light I couldn't tell which ones were significant. There were also several phone numbers written on scraps of paper, but when I called them, they were either disconnected or belonged to businesses that had never heard of James Anderson. Mrs. Rodriguez came over when she saw me searching the backyard. She was a sweet woman in her 70s who had been our neighbor for over a decade. "Mija, what's wrong? I saw the police car this morning." I explained what had happened, and her face grew concerned. "That's very strange. Your grandfather is such a creature of habit. Every morning at 7:30, he walks to the corner store for his newspaper. Every afternoon at 4, he waters his tomato plants. I haven't seen him break his routine once in all the years I've known him. Did you see him leave this morning? Or notice anything unusual?" She shook her head slowly. "I was up early making breakfast for my grandson, but I didn't see James. Now that I think about it, I didn't see him yesterday afternoon either. He didn't water his plants." That detail hit me like a physical blow. Grandpa James loved those tomato plants more than anything. He had been growing them for 3 years, ever since I moved in, and he treated them like they were his children. The idea that he would abandon them was almost as unthinkable as the idea that he would abandon me. I spent the rest of the afternoon calling hospitals, homeless shelters, and senior centers throughout the Orlando area. No one had seen him or heard from him. I even called the few distant relatives I knew about, cousins and second cousins scattered across the country, but none of them had heard from Grandpa James in years. As evening approached, I found myself sitting in his chair at the kitchen table, staring at the note he had left behind. The paper was slightly yellowed, as if it had been torn from an old notepad, and I realized with a start that it was the same notepad we had been using for grocery lists and phone messages for as long as I could remember. Had he been planning this for weeks? Months? I tried to think back over the past few weeks, searching for clues I might have missed. There had been the strange phone calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room. There had been the day I came home to find him standing in the backyard, staring up at the sky with tears in his eyes. When I asked him what was wrong, he had simply said he was thinking about the past. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Grandpa James had been saying goodbye in small ways for weeks. The extra long hugs when I left for work. The way he had started telling me stories about his childhood that he had never shared before. The evening he had spent teaching me how to make his famous meatloaf, insisting I write down every ingredient and measurement, even though I protested that he would be around to make it himself for years to come. On that evening, I did something I had never done before. I went into the locked room upstairs. Grandpa James had always said it was just storage, filled with old furniture and boxes of things he didn't need but couldn't bring himself to throw away. He kept the key on a hook in the kitchen, but he had made it clear that the room was off limits. I had respected that boundary for 3 years, but now, with him gone and no answers in sight, I felt like I had no choice. The key turned easily in the lock, and the door opened with a soft creak that seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet house. What I found inside took my breath away. It wasn't storage at all. It was a shrine to my grandmother, Eleanor, who had died 5 years before I was born. The walls were covered with photographs of her at different stages of her life, as a young woman with bright eyes and a radiant smile, as a new bride standing next to a much younger version of Grandpa James, as a mother holding a baby who must have been my father. But it was more than just photographs. There were letters, hundreds of them, tied with ribbons and organized by date. There were pressed flowers, ticket stubs from movies and concerts, and small mementos that told the story of a love that had lasted decades. In the center of the room was a small desk with a chair positioned so that whoever sat there would be facing the largest photograph of Eleanor, a portrait that showed her in her 40s with laugh lines around her eyes and her hand resting on her heart. On the desk was an open journal, and when I saw the date on the top page, my knees nearly gave out. It was from yesterday, written in Grandpa James's careful handwriting. My dearest Eleanor, tomorrow will be exactly 40 years since you left me. I know I promised I would take care of Avery, and I have tried my best, but I can't shake the feeling that I'm failing her the same way I failed you. She's strong and independent, stronger than I ever was, but she deserves more than an old man who spends his evenings talking to photographs. I sank into the chair and continued reading, my heart breaking with every word. I've been dreaming about you more often lately. Not the sad dreams where I wake up remembering that you're gone, but the good dreams where we're young again and everything is possible. In last night's dream, we were dancing in the kitchen to that song you loved, the one by Nat King Cole. You told me you were waiting for me, that you had been waiting all this time, and that it was okay for me to come home. The journal entries went back months, and as I read them, I began to understand what had been happening to Grandpa James. He wasn't losing his mind, and he wasn't sick in any conventional sense. He was grieving still after all these years, and that grief had been growing heavier as he watched me build my own life and realized that I didn't need him the way I once had. I found entries that revealed the depth of his loneliness, his struggle to find meaning in a life that felt incomplete without Eleanor. He wrote about watching me laugh on the phone with friends and feeling both joy and sorrow, knowing that I was building connections that would eventually lead me away from him. He wrote about the weight of being the sole keeper of Eleanor's memory, the exhaustion of carrying 40 years of love with nowhere to direct it. One entry dated just 2 weeks ago particularly broke my heart. I saw Avery looking at apartment listings online today. She doesn't know I noticed, but I did. She's 22 years old, and she should be living her own life, not taking care of an old man who can't let go of the past. I want to tell her it's okay to leave, that I'll be fine on my own. But the truth is, I don't know how to be alone in this house without her laughter filling the empty spaces. Another entry revealed his internal struggle. I've been thinking about what it means to love someone. When Eleanor was alive, love felt like a celebration, like every day was a gift we were giving each other. But after she died, love became a burden, something heavy I carried around because I didn't know how to put it down. I've been carrying this weight for 40 years, and I'm tired, Eleanor. I'm so very tired. The final entry was the most heartbreaking. I know Avery thinks I'm being dramatic when I tell her I won't be here in September, but I can feel it in my bones. Not death exactly, but a kind of ending. I've spent 40 years in this house without you, Eleanor, and I think that's long enough. I've done my duty. I've raised our son, even though he turned out to be a disappointment. I've taken care of our granddaughter, and she's going to be fine without me. Better than fine. She's going to be extraordinary. I was crying by the time I finished reading, but I was also angry. How could he think I didn't need him? How could he believe that I would be better off without the one person who had shown me what unconditional love looked like? I spent the rest of the night in that room, reading through the letters and looking at the photographs, trying to piece together the love story that had shaped my grandfather's entire life. Eleanor had been a teacher, and from the letters she had written to him during their courtship, I could see where I had gotten my love of words and stories. She had been funny and kind and fiercely intelligent, and it was clear that losing her had broken something in Grandpa James that had never fully healed. The letters revealed a romance that had begun in 1952, when they were both 21 years old. They had met at a church social, and Eleanor had written to her sister about a young man with the kindest eyes I've ever seen and a smile that makes me forget my own name. Their courtship had lasted 2 years, filled with long walks, shared books, and letters that revealed two souls perfectly matched in their hopes and dreams. Their marriage had been happy. That much was clear from the photographs and mementos scattered throughout the room. There were ticket stubs from their honeymoon trip to Niagara Falls, pressed flowers from their first anniversary, and photographs from family gatherings that showed them always touching, always connected, even in a crowd. Eleanor had died suddenly of a heart attack at the age of 43, when my father was just 16 years old. The last letter in the collection was one that Grandpa James had written to her, but never sent, dated the day after her funeral. My darling Eleanor, I don't know how to do this without you. I don't know how to be a father to our son when I can barely remember how to breathe. I don't know how to live in this house where every corner holds a memory of your laughter. But I promise you this, I will try. I will take care of our boy, and I will keep your memory alive, and somehow, someday, I will find a way to make you proud of the man I become in your absence. As dawn broke over Orlando, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I finally understood where he had gone. The Greenwood Cemetery was a 40-minute bus ride from our house, and I realized that Grandpa James must have planned this journey carefully. He would have had to wake up before dawn to catch the early bus, which explained why the coffee pot was still warm when I found his note. I had only been to Eleanor's grave once before, shortly after I moved in with Grandpa James. He had taken me there on a Sunday afternoon, and I remembered being struck by how peaceful the place was, with its old oak trees and carefully tended gardens. What I remembered most clearly was the way Grandpa James had stood at the headstone, not saying anything, just holding my hand and staring at the inscription. Eleanor Marie Anderson, beloved wife and mother, 1934-1977. The cemetery was larger than I remembered, with winding paths that led through different sections marked by decades and family plots. I had to ask the groundskeeper for directions to Eleanor's grave, and he pointed me toward a section near the back where the older headstones stood beneath towering oak trees draped with Spanish moss. I found him there, sitting on a small folding chair he must have brought with him, talking quietly to the headstone, as if Eleanor were sitting right beside him. He looked smaller somehow, more fragile than I had ever seen him, but there was also a kind of peace in his expression that I hadn't seen in years. I wondered when you'd figure it out, he said without turning around when he heard my footsteps on the gravel path. Grandpa James, I said, my voice breaking with relief and exhaustion and a dozen other emotions I couldn't name. You read the journal, didn't you? I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Why didn't you just tell me? Why did you have to disappear like that? He was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. Because I was afraid you'd try to talk me out of it. And because I was afraid you'd think I was giving up. Aren't you? He turned to look at me then, and I saw that his eyes were red-rimmed but clear. No, sweetheart, I'm not giving up. I'm just letting go. I sat down on the grass beside his chair, not caring that the morning dew was soaking through my clothes. I don't understand the difference. Giving up means you stop fighting because you don't think you can win. Letting go means you stop fighting because you realize the fight is over and it's time to move on to whatever comes next. But what about me? What about us? He reached down and took my hand in his weathered one. Avery, you are the best thing that has happened to me since your grandmother died. These 3 years with you have been a gift I never expected to receive. But you're 22 years old, and you have your whole life ahead of you. You shouldn't be spending your best years taking care of an old man who talks to photographs. I don't take care of you, I protested. We take care of each other. And that's exactly why I love you so much, he said, squeezing my hand. But it's also why I know you're going to be okay without me. We sat there in silence for a while, watching the sun climb higher in the sky and listening to the sounds of the city waking up around us. A mockingbird perched in the oak tree above us began its morning song, cycling through the calls of a dozen different birds with impressive accuracy. The sound was beautiful and somehow comforting, as if nature itself was offering a kind of benediction to our conversation. I've been coming here every week for 40 years, Grandpa James said suddenly. Every Sunday after church, I would drive here and sit with her and tell her about my week. After you moved in, I started telling her about you. About how proud I was of the woman you were becoming, about how much you reminded me of her. What did you tell her about me? He smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it reached his eyes. I told her that you had her spirit, her curiosity about the world. I told her that you made me laugh the way she used to, that you challenged me to think about things differently. I told her that loving you had reminded me what it felt like to have purpose again. Then why do you want to leave me? I don't want to leave you, Avery. But I realized that I've been holding on to grief for so long that I forgot how to hold on to joy. I've been so focused on preserving Eleanor's memory that I stopped creating new memories worth preserving. Finally, I asked the question that had been burning in my chest since I found his note. Are you planning to hurt yourself? No, he said firmly. I'm not planning to hurt myself. I'm planning to live whatever time I have left on my own terms, instead of just going through the motions because it's what's expected of me. Then come home with me. Live on your own terms there. He was quiet for so long that I thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I've been having dreams about her, Avery. Dreams where she tells me it's okay to stop carrying all this grief around like a burden. Dreams where she reminds me that love isn't supposed to be a weight that drags you down, but a light that lifts you up. Maybe the dreams are telling you that it's time to start living again, not time to stop living altogether. He looked at me with surprise, as if that possibility had never occurred to him. What do you mean? I mean, maybe Eleanor isn't waiting for you to join her. Maybe she's waiting for you to remember how to be happy without her. We talked for another hour, sitting there beside Eleanor's grave, and slowly I began to see a change in Grandpa James's expression. It was subtle at first, like clouds shifting to let through a little more sunlight, but gradually, something that had been closed off in him began to open up again. I don't know how to be happy without her, he admitted finally. Then let me help you learn, I said. The same way you helped me learn how to be strong when my parents abandoned me. He was crying now, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks, but he was also smiling. When did you get so wise? I had a good teacher. I told him about the apartment listings he had seen me looking at, explaining that I hadn't been planning to move out, but rather researching rental prices for a friend from work. I told him about all the things I had learned from reading Eleanor's letters, about how I could see their love reflected in the way he had raised me. I told him that I wasn't staying with him out of obligation, but because our little family of 2 was exactly where I wanted to be. But you should be dating, building relationships with people your own age, he protested. I am dating, I said. I'm building relationships. But that doesn't mean I want to stop being your granddaughter. It doesn't mean I want to stop learning from you and laughing with you and taking care of each other. I've been so afraid of being a burden to you. And I've been afraid of losing the only person who ever made me feel like I was enough just as I am. We rode the bus home together, and as we walked up the front steps of our house, I noticed that Grandpa James paused to look at his tomato plants. They were wilted from lack of water, but not beyond saving. I should take care of those, he said. We should take care of them, I corrected him. That afternoon, we spent hours in the garden together, watering the plants and talking about everything and nothing. Grandpa James told me stories about Eleanor that he had never shared before, stories that painted a picture of a woman who would have loved me fiercely and who would have wanted nothing more than for the people she left behind to find joy in living. As the sun began to set, we moved to the front porch with glasses of sweet tea, just like we had done countless times before. But this time felt different, charged with a new understanding and a renewed commitment to each other. You know, Avery, Grandpa James said, watching the neighborhood kids chase fireflies in the gathering dusk, I think I've been looking at this all wrong. What do you mean? I've been thinking that loving Eleanor meant holding on to the pain of losing her. But maybe loving her means holding on to the joy of having known her. Maybe it means creating new joy in her honor. I smiled and took his hand. I think you're right, Grandpa. I think that's exactly what it means. That evening, we sat on the front porch again, watching the neighborhood kids chase fireflies just like we had 3 weeks earlier. But this time, when Grandpa James spoke, his voice carried hope instead of resignation. You know, Avery, I think September might not be so bad after all. I smiled and took his hand. I think you're right, Grandpa. I think it's going to be beautiful. And as the fireflies danced around us in the warm Orlando evening, I realized that sometimes the most important journeys aren't about going somewhere new, but about finding your way back to where you belong. Sometimes love means letting go of the past, and sometimes it means holding on tighter to the present. But always, always, it means choosing to keep your heart open to the possibility of joy, even in the midst of sorrow. Wine. We hope this story touched your heart and reminded you of the importance of family bonds and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. If you enjoyed this emotional journey with Avery and Grandpa James, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories that celebrate the human spirit. We'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Tell us which city you're watching from and share your thoughts about this story. Did it remind you of someone special in your life? Your engagement means the world to us and helps us continue bringing you these daily stories that explore the depths of human emotion and connection. Remember, we upload a new story every single day, so make sure you hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. Until tomorrow, take care of yourselves and the people you love. See you in the next video.